A while ago I made a video about my broken SX-70. It had problems, best summed up with this photo. I started to look into different repair places, but it kinda got put on the back burner and I eventually just forgot about it. But then a few months ago, I got a message from Dennis at chromatic.parts over on Instagram. He was willing to fix my camera in exchange for a full and honest review of his services. Other than some technical information, he had no input as to what I have to say. Seemed like a good deal to me, so I sent him my camera. Here's a list of the general refurbishments that was done. After I got the camera back, I blasted through a pack of film just to test it out. One of the big issues I had was the camera would jam constantly, so every time I took a photo, I was holding my breath thinking, is it gonna jam this time? Luckily for me, I went through the entire pack without it jamming or exploding a chemical pod, so off to a good start. Only weird thing I noticed was this overexposed strip at the top of the frame. These were all shot in direct sunlight, and I've since shot some in less harsh light and it didn't have this problem. I'm not really sure what the cause of the problem is, but I just thought it's worth mentioning. Anyway, when I sent this camera in, I didn't just send it in for repair, I also had it modified to take 600 film. If you're not familiar with Polaroid film, there's two different types of emulsions, SX-70 and 600. SX-70 is 160 speed, whereas 600 is, you guessed it, 640 speed. I know you could put an ND filter on the film pack and shoot 600 film in an SX-70 without modification, but the main reason why I wanted this conversion is for the extra 2 stops of sensitivity. The SX-70 has an f8 lens, which if you pair that with 160 speed film, you're gonna need a lot of light to get a decent exposure. And given how I wanted to shoot this mostly handheld, it's a no-brainer for me to get the 600 conversion. That and the frames. At the time of recording, here are the different types of SX-70 film that's being offered. Black and white emulsion with white frames, and color emulsion with white frames. That's it. With 600 film, you also have black and white with white frames and color with white frames, but you also have color frames and round frames. There are also limited edition emulsions like Reclaim Blue, and especially if you go all the way back to the Impossible Project days, they had tons of limited edition frames and emulsions for 600. Not so much for SX-70. So it's really cool to have access to all of these different frames and emulsions. Unfortunately, some of the coolest frames are reserved for I-type cameras. I-type film is exactly the same as 600 film, the difference is in the film packs. SX-70 and 600 packs have integrated batteries, whereas I-type does not. These old cameras don't have any batteries built in and they get their powers from the film packs. So I-type film packs aren't compatible with older cameras. It even says so in the back of I-type film boxes. Which again sucks because all of the cool frames are for I-type. Now there are ways around this though. You could take an I-type pack and in the dark carefully remove the film and rehouse them into a 600 pack. Another way would be to externally power the camera. I've seen people connect one of these battery packs directly onto the camera. You would have to like drill a hole somewhere around here and then take these wires and solder them directly onto the battery terminals and then just tape it on like that or something. It isn't elegant, but it apparently works. And then there's something like this. This is a power bar. This is a product that's offered by chromatic.parts. It's an external battery pack that fits onto a flash bar slot of an SX-70. It does require modification to the camera's electronics, but not at the expense of any other features. The flash bar slot still works as normal, and if the power bar is removed, it operates just like any other SX-70. The first I-type film I shot through this camera were these black frames. I wish I had more examples to show, but I just kept taking pictures of people and just handing them out like candy. I love these black frames. I think they look awesome. If I had a choice, these would be my go-to frames for everyday shooting. I also shot some of these Bowie frames. Now that I have a fully functioning SX-70, it got me thinking, what else can I do with this camera? A while back, a viewer named Matt sent me a box full of film, one of which was this roll of Polaroid High Definition 100. It's some old color film that expired in '91. And my first thought was, it'd be a real shame to shoot this Polaroid film in anything but a Polaroid camera. There have been Polaroid branded 35mm cameras, but I don't have any of those. I do have this. So yeah, this looks terrible. There's a lot going on here. It's hard to see, but there are faint images on this. I also did develop this in Rodinal for reasons. Let me just explain the whole thing. In the dark, I took strips of this film and then I mounted it onto this card. And then I slid it into an empty film pack, like that, and I loaded this into a camera. Now I didn't really think this through because there's no real manual exposure controls on this camera. You do have this exposure compensation dial, but that's about it. And with this being expired 100 speed film and this camera being converted to 600 film, that wasn't really a great combination. And even though this film came out super thin, thanks to modern technology, it bailed me out and it got me this usable image. Well, 3 usable images, because I trichromed it. There was this big logistical hurdle that I needed to figure out. With a Polaroid, after the exposure, it'll spit out the print, but I can't have that because the film is just sitting there. So on these cards, I cut out this notch, which is where the pick arm would push the print out of the cartridge. So that solves that issue, but it also means that after the exposure, the film is just going to sit in the camera, rendering it pretty much unusable until I extract the film out of it. One option would be to bring a changing bag with me and swap out preloaded film packs on location. That would have been a whole operation I just didn't want to deal with, so I found another solution. Let me introduce to you my broken army of SX-70s. This sonar is actually in pretty good shape and it works well, except the pick arm doesn't eject prints some of the times. This other sonar is in pretty sad shape. The pick arm also doesn't eject film and the meter needs to be calibrated and the mirror sticks, among other issues. But the shutters on both of these work just fine and they do make exposures. That's how I ended up with this trichrome. So big shout out to Matt for sending me this film and big shout out to Dennis over at chromatic.parts for fixing the camera. A couple loose things I need to mention. I had an opportunity to change the camera leather color to something better than the stock brown, but I kept it like this because this is the stock leather that came with the camera. Most other repair places state that the stock leather can't be reused because Polaroid mounted their leather directly onto this metal plate, which needs to be removed to access the screws holding the camera together. And I was under the impression that there was no non-destructive way of doing this. While my preference would have been to have some wacky colors, I think it's really cool to have the original leather that was on this camera. And also, depending on where you live, this could be a good or a bad thing, but Dennis is over in the UK. If you live outside of Europe, shipping costs can be expensive, but he does offer services that I think no one else offers. Overall, I'm very happy with how this camera turned out. It's great to have it working again. I feel like I'm only scratching the surface as to what I could do with it. So to wrap this all up, I don't think you're supposed to shoot this film with this camera.